1 coconut, 2 coconuts, 3 coconuts.
Go back to your own country.
I love Sesame Street. I love its puppetry, parodies, and positive messaging on educational and moral topics. It was equally entertaining and informative. It would present colorful and genuinely funny characters teaching concepts of sharing, acceptance, inclusion, and empathy. Those lessons happen to be everything that conservatives hate, which is why they've been trying to dismantle this television institution for decades. Big Bird has been a big target, and now that Republicans have gutted PBS funding, they're closer than ever to the kill shot. But this goes far beyond conservatives just trying to cancel one TV show. In 1969, the Children's Television Workshop debuted Sesame Street. The show combined puppets, live-action skits on an inner-city street stage, and colorful animations. The program aimed to develop television that could be used for early education, in this case, preparing children for kindergarten. There were other educational TV shows at the time, but they were not as effective at reaching or teaching. Sesame Street would be something far different. The show was developed by Joan Cooney and Lloyd Morissette with the help of Jim Henson and his puppetry expertise. Initially, Henson's puppetry would only be a minor series segment. The scenes on the actual street initially featured human actors while the puppets were on a different set. However, when testing the show, kids were more interested in Henson's puppets. Thus, the puppets would merge with the human characters for the street segments of Sesame Street. But the puppets would still be in their own human-free sequences as well. Short animated segments would also break up the show, and most of them were simple songs and rhymes that taught essential concepts in a fun way with repetition. Some of these cartoon bits were a bit strange, like the ones featuring Batman. Like, did you know Batman was on Sesame Street? I'm going to gloss over the pre-production of this show for time purposes, but if you want to know more about how Sesame Street became a reality, I highly recommend reading the book Street Gang: The Complete History of Sesame Street. It reveals so much about what made the show possible, and has plenty of unique anecdotes like Maurice Sendak doodling penises and boredom during production meetings, and the fears of Jim Henson being in the Weather Underground just based on the way he looked. Anyway, Sesame Street was a crucial inclusion of PBS going forward because it showcased a balance for their future educational lineup. Most PBS kids shows favor either one of two forms of education, usually either academic or social. Academic shows are generally designed to teach one subject well. Cyber Chase had math, Word Girl had vocabulary, and Nature Cat had environmental sciences. Social education shows are designed to relate to kids by featuring familiar situations, aspects of communication, and learning how to understand and manage your emotions. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was a classic example of this, and his ethics of teaching about feelings carried on into the animated spin-off series Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood. Arthur is also a strong piece of social education, especially for its willingness to discuss topics of maturity, bullying, trauma, and mental conditions. It also had a cameo by Fred Rogers, which was very appropriate. Sesame Street is important because it combines both types of academic and social education. The lessons could be about anything from matching patterns to handling anger. It's why it's a bit aggravating when so many people feel that Sesame Street is only viable for teaching preschool academic basics. Some will often just say that all Sesame Street should do is teach numbers, letters, shapes, and colors, and nothing else. But this really ignores what makes Sesame Street stand out from other educational programs. Sure, the main goal was giving preschoolers a head start before kindergarten, but there was also an earnestness that came with such a show. In 1983, Will Lee, the Sesame Street actor who played the shop owner of Mr. Hooper, tragically died. Rather than casually write this familiar character out of the show as they have done for other actors, Sesame Street decided to address Lee's death straight on and boldly. Within the canon of Sesame Street, Mr. Hooper dies off screen, and his death is addressed in a rather profound episode. The most emotional part of this episode is when Big Bird finds it hard to understand why people die. He thinks Hooper will return soon, but the adults have to explain this isn't how mortality works. This naturally angers Big Bird. He doesn't understand why people leave us forever when they die. And rather than offer an easy explanation of the existence of an afterlife or say that Hooper isn't really dead, the adults tell Big Bird that this is just how the world works. Our time is limited, but we can leave our mark and appreciate the time that we spend alive. Those we love can die, but they'll still be with us as long as we have our memories of them.
It won't be the same.
You're right, Big Bird. It'll never be the same around here without him. But you know something? We can all be very happy that we had a chance to be with him and to know him and to love him a lot when he was here.
This was a genuinely sad and heartfelt episode because it unflinchingly discussed a complex topic that even adults struggle to understand. But Sesame Street didn't just make very special episodes on a whim. So much research goes into the show's emotional communication as it does into its academics. If an educational aspect isn't working, it will be retooled or even scrapped from the show. In 1992, Sesame Street wanted to expand the character of Snuffy and feature his divorced father. One episode would feature Snuffy and his sister playing with their dad but returning to their mother's house. His dad had to explain again why he doesn't live with his children. It looked to be a very emotional episode, but the child test audience found themselves confused and frustrated with the material. And despite the pressures of some of the actors to release this episode, the producers decided not to air it as it wasn't up to their educational standards. But Sesame Street has only gotten better at discussing these tougher topics. Part of that is due to the video resources that are offered through the Sesame Workshop, which is separate from what appears on the show. And in terms of understanding mortality, the workshop developed a special video series specifically for kids dealing with the death of a parent. In fact, there's a whole series of Sesame Street specials designed to talk about complicated topics. This includes when parents serve in the military, parents have addiction issues, kids end up in foster care, and parents who are incarcerated. These videos involve familiar characters from the show to make the message about handling complicated feelings seem less scary and easier to understand for a young audience still processing these situations. And I need you to understand this going forward. No other show does this. Not to this degree, anyway. Some TV shows for kids might address death or separation issues, but none offer a wealth of resources the way that Sesame Street does. Just looking through the Sesame Workshop website, I see that there are so many important and meaningful educational tools, not just for kids, but also for parents. This whole project is not just about teaching kids a few lessons, but letting parents in on the developmental process as well. And most importantly, it's free. You don't have to pay for any of the downloadable or printable resources on the Sesame Workshop website. It may not be free as it has the support of taxpayers, but be honest, do you really think resources that help parents and children grow with better influences and lessons are a waste of money? Because it doesn't to me. Sesame Street has also always been about inclusion. The fact that the show was pitched as featuring black and white characters occupying the same street and being friends with one another led to some southern districts of America refusing to air the program. But Sesame Street has stayed committed to this level of inclusion and has only increased it ever since. Over the years, Sesame Street has included live action and puppet characters who are deaf, blind, wheelchair-bound, and autistic. And one of their more recent additions was a puppet character who was homeless. Now, upon the news of that last inclusion, many people popped up on social media to point out that Sesame Street already has a homeless character, Oscar the Grouch. And yes, Oscar does live in a garbage can instead of a house or apartment, but there's a key aspect of his character that a lot of people miss. Oscar lives in a trash can by choice and actually loves living in filth. And you can understand why this is an issue if you want to represent homeless people, right? Like, you don't want kids to believe that homeless people end up that way because they just like that lifestyle. There's an episode of The Simpsons where Homer looks at a homeless man sleeping in a dumpster. Homer laughs and says the homeless man is just like Oscar the Grouch. The joke couldn't be any clearer. Homer has a view of homeless people that he has taken from television and inappropriately placed it on an actual homeless person. And Oscar was never meant to accurately represent homeless people. His whole deal is that he's a contrarian. He's a counterbalance to all the wholesomeness of Sesame Street. He's more or less the cynical comic relief of the show. He does not represent the homeless population due to the obvious negative connotation. There has also been some social media feuds about Sesame Street's move to include an African American and Korean puppet. Some people felt that the show didn't need these characters created to show racial diversity because A, the show already had a diverse cast of human characters, and B, the puppets don't have races. Now, the first part is correct. Yes, there are many different human characters, but the second part is categorically wrong. There have been puppets featured on Sesame Street with clearly different cultures and races. Many old school fans will be quick to point out the lingering character of Roosevelt Franklin. Roosevelt Franklin wasn't explicitly identified as a black character, but he was portrayed as someone who was black and was a creation of Matt Robinson, the actor who had played Gordon. Roosevelt would often talk loudly about a variety of subjects when he was addressing a classroom, and one of the topics he liked to talk about was Africa. Roosevelt Franklin, however, was one of the early Muppets that was discontinued from the show. By the early 1990s, however, the puppet character of Rosita was introduced. And Rosita is clearly meant to represent Latin American culture, given that she comes from Mexico and speaks English and Spanish as a bilingual character. And Rosita still remains among the regular cast of characters today. So having race and culture-specific Muppets is not a new thing. Now, while these criticisms of the show tend to come and go, there's been one persistent argument against Sesame Street that's been made by conservatives. It's funding. Sesame Street's funding has been a mixed bag over the decades. It's always been a combination of government grants and private foundations, but federal funding has been very unreliable for the show. Even as early as the 1970s, the Children's Television Workshop struggled to secure federal funding. The lack of federal funds led the workshop to pursue licensing agreements to keep the production going. In the late 1990s, the show even went so far as to have a corporate sponsorship. This all seemed counterintuitive to what Sesame Street represented, as a show meant more to educate than sell products. But what choice did the show have at this point? Making a show with such high production values and immense educational research placed in every season didn't come cheap. And you would think that since this is a valuable and easily accessible piece of education, the government should be funding it more. It didn't help that political pundits were deeply questioning the funding of PBS programming. Fox News would talk about how Mr. Rogers made America look weak by promoting kindness and empathy. This wasn't based on any firm psychological study or insightful philosophical theory. Rather, it was just a bunch of brain-dead talking heads who didn't like a story where everyone got participation trophies and wanted someone to blame for it. Maybe, they thought, Mr. Rogers is the culprit. After all, he promoted tolerance and empathy, and those are apparently traits that make you weak, according to these water cooler weirdos. Sesame Street came into the crosshairs of the conservative news apparatus when failed screenwriter and political pundit Ben Shapiro wrote about how Sesame Street was left-leaning propaganda. His evidence for this is that he spoke with Children's Television Workshop producer Mike Don, who said that Sesame Street was trying to target Black and Hispanic kids that were having problems with literacy. But this is nothing new. That's been one of Sesame Street's goals since day one. The show didn't just happen to cast people of color in the late 1960s by accident. There's a reason that the show featured characters like Gordon and Maria, and it wasn't just because they were the right actors for the job. But Ben Shapiro frames this so that the need to appeal to a broader audience for vital early education is somehow racist? It's a jump so dumb that even he can't admit it's fully racist, and instead calls it soft bigotry. He also got mad at the gender-neutral language on the website and felt that Neil Patrick Harris appearing on the show as a fairy was going to indoctrinate children with homosexuality. Ben Shapiro then went on Fox News, where he had this exchange with Sean Hannity.
Every kid in America is going to hate you. You take it on Elmo and Sesame Street and Big Bird in your book.
Yeah, I kind of want to take him out back and cap him.
I am sorry, dear children. You may no longer watch your beloved Sesame Street, for it has been tainted with leftist politics. That is why Uncle Ben had to take Elmo and Big Bird out back, so that he could put a cap in there. This is really weird. Can we just admit that? This is a grown man talking about one of the most the longest running and most important long-form educational television shows out there, and he's joking that he wants to murder the characters of that show. And I know it's a joke, but it's based on the premise that he thinks Sesame Street is teaching the wrong things with the weakest evidence possible. Bill O'Reilly also contributed to the conservative cry of defunding Sesame Street, and Jon Stewart rightfully mocked him for this stance in their big streaming debate.
You don't want your taxes to go to something that you don't agree with. Is that your premise?
I want them to go. I want my taxes to go to people who need help.
But the reason that we invest in things like public television is that it brings educational programs to communities that would not have them. It's one of the best investments we ever made as a country. Now, second of all, the investment in public television is $130 million. $130 million. And I am sorry that you don't want to spend your hard-earned tax money on that $130 million, but let me say this to you. Welcome to the fucking club. Now, no.
Do you know how many birth control pills
Here's what I would say.
Come on.
Give me my money back. The $800 billion for the Iraq War and children's television is on the house.
Man, remember when Bill O'Reilly was a big deal? He was like Fox News' blowhard king until he got fired for being a sex pest. O'Reilly might have been dethroned, but the bashing of Sesame Street continued. It got so bad that HBO bought the broadcast rights in 2015, and here's where things get really messy. It may surprise some who only know HBO for programming like The Sopranos and Game of Thrones, but HBO previously had a bit of a devotion to children's entertainment. Their most notable acquisition was in the 1980s with Jim Henson's Fraggle Rock. They've also aired shows like Babar and several animated specials based on children's books. So it wasn't odd that HBO sought to add more children's entertainment to the channel, especially since they didn't have much to offer in the 2010s. It was odd, however, that they wanted Sesame Street? Since it had been there for decades, Sesame Street always felt like a show that should always be on PBS. So to have it on HBO just felt weird. This was a show built to reach out to educate and entertain young viewers in households of all cultures and economic statuses. How can the show keep doing that if it's now on a premium cable channel? The good news, however, was that Sesame Street was not leaving PBS. New episodes produced with the help of HBO would also air on PBS. The only bad news with that was that you'd have to wait about 9 months for those episodes to arrive on PBS. And if this were any other cable show, that'd be understandable. I mean, it takes about the same amount of time for, something like The Walking Dead to go from AMC to Netflix. But this is Sesame Street we're talking about here. Sesame Street is one of the leading early educational programs on television, and way more research is put into it than any other PBS program. The writers and educators behind the program provide an extensive background on the relevant material that they want to cover and how best to cover it. The standards for what counts as educational content on the show, while still remaining entertaining, are incredibly high, which is why there's usually a high turnover rate in the educational teams for such a rigorous process. This much work is put into the program to highlight children's shifting learning styles. The techniques used to educate kids in the 1960s are way different from those used to educate them in the 2020s. That's why the show is constantly updating and restructuring to ensure that the material is being presented not only accurately, but also effectively at educating young minds. And in 9 months, a lot can change. The latest season of Sesame Street could contain valuable new information that would be essential for kids entering kindergarten or experiencing something new as part of growing up. Having such an invaluable resource behind a paywall where there wasn't one before is just bizarre. Kids grow up fast, and there's a lot that can happen in a short amount of time with their developing minds. Should the kids whose parents shelled out to watch Succession really deserve the more updated Sesame Street than the parents who rely on the free PBS airings of the show? It's also kind of weird that HBO would do this, since there's little reason to hoard the Sesame Street episodes. You could maybe understand if this was the only Sesame Street media that they had, but that's not true. HBO Max had a Sesame Street exclusive spin-off with The Not Too Late Show with Elmo, one of the streaming service's launch titles. And a host of recent and classic Sesame Street episodes were also archived on HBO Max in a way that they are not on PBS. Warner Brothers also initially planned a Sesame Street movie under this contract, which didn't end up being made, but most definitely would not be airing on PBS anytime soon. Among all this Sesame Street material Warner Brothers had helped produce, the central show remains one of the most crucial to get out there to as many kids as possible. The Not Too Late Show is cute, but there's nothing all that valuable educationally, considering it's a wholesome talk show parody. I'm sure the movie would be cute as well, but chances are it wouldn't be as well researched with educational content as the show, considering that comedy writers were primarily handling the script. HBO would later dump most of its Sesame Street projects as part of the Great Warner Discovery Purge. They deleted about 200 episodes from the service and removed the Not Too Late Show. And at that point, why not just hand everything over to PBS? Why not share the show? Sharing a concept taught on Sesame Street? A similar situation happened with the Charlie Brown specials. For many decades, A Charlie Brown Christmas became a staple of network airings every Christmas. The special would run on some major networks in December every year for over 50 years. But in 2020, the horrors of capitalism descended. Apple bought up all the rights to Charlie Brown and the Peanut specials and refused to air them on network television. While Apple retains the streaming rights to the specials, they did have to make A Charlie Brown Christmas available for free on its Apple TV Plus streaming service for a 3-day window during December. With enough pressure, though, a new deal was struck. Not only would A Charlie Brown Christmas be made available for free on Apple TV Plus without a subscription, but the special would also air on PBS stations. That's probably the best thing that could happen to this special. While it's not on network television like it previously was, it was featured on PBS without commercial interruptions. So the tradition lived on. Until 2022, when they stopped doing it for some reason. And we shouldn't let that same thing happen to a show more educationally essential as Sesame Street. But then something much worse happened. Amid the Warner Brothers Discovery merger, the studio just dumped everything. HBO Max turned into Max, the name changed more fitting since the service now offers about half of what it promised, and they've scaled back on everything from reruns to exclusive films. And with Sesame Street's contract due to expire, Warner Brothers just didn't renew it. So now that Sesame Street is no longer seen as profitable for Warner Brothers, they just tossed it aside. Sorry, early educational material that has been invaluable for many generations over 50 years, but times are tough, and you have to go. What's even worse is that since Sesame Street didn't have the full backing of either public or private funding, it was at its most vulnerable. And given that Republicans are gutting everything from healthcare to Social Security as of late, conservatives were set to dismantle Sesame Street. This is a vendetta they've had for the longest time, because they don't see Sesame Street as an important educational resource. They just see it as a TV show indoctrinating children that taxpayers are paying for. Georgia Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene declared that PBS was sexualizing and grooming children, and that the values being promoted by shows like Sesame Street were really communist. This type of language is not new, though. Sesame Street has been accused of being communist multiple times, dating as far back as the 1970s and as recently as 2021, when Arizona Senator Wendy Rogers got all pissy about Big Bird encouraging vaccinations, a sentiment that Ted Cruz was chiming in louder with. Sesame Street talking about vaccinations isn't new either. Here's footage of Big Bird encouraging vaccinations from an episode in 1972.
And there's a sign that says, "Don't wait, vaccinate." Huh.
Conservatives have long criticized Sesame Street because it represents everything that they hate. They don't want media that promotes empathy because that makes it harder to support their bigoted views on trans rights and immigration. They don't like the values of sharing extolled because that runs counter to the greedy ambitions of the capitalist structure from which they benefit the most. They don't like the diversity and inclusion of the cast because that presence values means their mean-spirited, punch-down punchlines will be seen more explicitly for the cruelty. They don't like that an entire generation will grow up learning by association that the whole foundation of the current Republican Party is wrong, not through vocal political stance, but general values of education, empathy, sharing, and kindness. And the easiest way to stop all that progressive talk and thinking is to control the conversation by cutting off the lessons at their source. Gutting Sesame Street means destroying a critical piece of early education, ensuring that an entire generation won't have a moral compass or informed outlook on how the world should be better. But it's not enough to merely gut Sesame Street. You need to replace it with something else to make sure your kids absolutely don't learn socialist ideas like sharing and not being a dick. The alternative that the Trump administration wants to institute is PragerU. PragerU is not a real university. It's a conservative advocacy group created by conservative talk show host Dennis Prager and Alan Estrin, the screenwriter of Pocahontas 2. I'm not kidding. PragerU doesn't offer educational courses, but they do make lots of annoying videos that they consider educational. This includes such topics as why there's a war on Christmas, why we shouldn't have a $15 minimum wage, why fascism is actually left-wing, and why being transgender is basically schizophrenia or a disease. They make their points with lots of infographics and charts that usually don't have accurate data because they're either based on erroneous sources or have no sources at all. And sometimes they don't even put labels on their graphs. Like they're just like, look, here's a graph, the arrow went up or down, thus proving my point. The videos are hosted by several noteworthy conservative commentators. This includes Dinesh D'Souza, a convicted felon for illegal campaign contributions, Candace Owens, a former Daily Wire associate who was fired for being anti-Semitic, and Michelle Malkin, a former Fox News contributor who was dropped from the Young America's Foundation for cozying up with neo-Nazis. So just a very colorful bunch of gross conservatives. All of these videos are built to be swallowed by conservatives and aggressively shared on your baby boomer parents' Facebook page. And I shouldn't have to tell you that these videos are overflowing with misinformation. There are plenty of videos on YouTube debunking PragerU's assertions and how nearly everything that they're promoting is exaggerated or a lie. And if you're more intellectually curious than a closed-minded conservative, it can be just as easy to get out of this cultish mindset as it is to fall into it. But it's a lot harder to deprogram that out of children during their foundational years. Enter PragerU Kids. It's all the same propaganda nonsense, but now it's geared for children. Their content is provided as an educational resource for private schools and also public schools in some states. So don't worry, parents and teachers. PBS might be going away due to its loss of funding, but PragerU has you covered. So instead of your children getting valuable lessons from Sesame Street, Arthur, and Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, now they'll be entertained and informed by Leo and Layla's History Adventures, Otto's Tales, and Cash Course. So let's take a gander at what kids are going to be learning instead of the commie socialist radical leftism from Sesame Street. Let's start at grade levels 3 through 5 with Leo and Layla learning about Christopher Columbus.
What's up with the face? You look stressed.
I'm just doing some research. Was today weird for you?
Yeah, how'd you guess?
Columbus Day.
Or Native American Day, or Indigenous Peoples Day. It's weird, right?
Yeah, some of the teachers at my school really don't like Christopher Columbus and don't think he should have a holiday, but some do.
It's the same with my teachers, and even some kids got into arguments about it today.
This is a quick reminder that conservatives and the Trump administration want to show these videos in public schools. This video starts by saying that teachers might be wrong about Christopher Columbus not being a really great guy.
You finding any good info?
Kinda, but it's real mixed. The side against Columbus says he was a really mean guy who spread slavery, disease, and violence to people who would have been better off if he'd never gone to the New World.
Ouch.
I know, but the side for him says he was a really courageous guy who loved exploring, inspired generations, and spread Christianity and Western civilization to people who really benefited from new ways of thinking and doing things.
That sounds really good.
I know.
Yes, tough call. On the one hand, slavery and disease, but on the other hand, Christianity and Western civilization forced upon Native American land. Real mixed bag, that Columbus.
It seems really complicated, but both sides are just giving their opinions. It would be cool to hear from, the source. Huh?
You want us to go talk to Christopher Columbus, don't you?
Yeah, that's a normal thing that people do when they want to find the truth. They just go directly to the source. And if that source is a dead man, just make up stuff he'd say. I mean, that's just as good. But also, no? Even if Christopher Columbus were still alive through Futurama rules or something like that, he probably wouldn't admit to his atrocities or, he'd probably downplay them. If I wanted to find out if Donald Trump abused several women, who would you think is a better source? The women making the accusations with credible evidence or Donald Trump himself? Because Donald Trump will flat out lie to you about these cases. So we're already teaching kids the worst critical thinking skills right out of the gate. But okay, the kids are aware of the arguments against Christopher Columbus, so let's see how this cartoon version of the historical figure defends himself.
I'm sorry, Mr. Columbus, but I heard at school that you spoiled paradise and you brought slavery and murder to peaceful people.
Leo?
Sorry, it's what I read and heard at school.
Caramba! Those are some accusations. The place I discovered was beautiful, but it wasn't exactly a paradise of civilization, and the native people were far from peaceful.
But you just said the Taino were peaceful.
They pretty much are. But there are other tribes who aren't. The Taino I had met had cuts and scars and bruises all over them. I asked why, and they told me about the Caribs, who are vicious, warring cannibals.
Cannibals? Like they
eat people, see.
Whoa.
Right? Hey, all the things that are bad in the world I come from, jealousy, lying, murder, war, it all exists in the land I just found too. But in Europe, we draw the line at things like eating people and human sacrifice.
The Caribs, better known as the Kalinago, have been criticized for cannibalism by historians. And while it is true that Columbus did hear about the cannibalism of the Caribs, the information apparently came from stories that he heard from the Taino tribe, who were, their enemies. The claims of cannibalism, however, have been greatly disputed, and there's not enough evidence to confirm that the Caribs ate people. Missionaries who have spent time among the Carib people, however, have argued that they did not witness cannibalism being practiced. But yeah, sure, just take cartoon Christopher Columbus's word for it, kids. I'm sure it won't make you look really dumb later.
Yeah, but what about slavery? You didn't deny that.
Deny? No. Slavery is as old as time and has taken place in every corner of the world, even amongst the people I just left. Being taken as a slave is better than being killed, no? I don't see the problem.
You don't see what the problem is with slavery? What a horrible defense of something so hideous. The argument for slavery is that it's better than being dead. Yeah, except for the crucial historical fact that many slaves willingly threw themselves over ships to drown themselves because they'd rather be dead than be enslaved for a lifetime. So saying being taken as a slave is better than being killed is a very idiotic thing to say because yes, many slaves would rather die than be slaves because being a slave is horrible.
Well, in our time, we view slavery as being evil and terrible.
Ah, magnifico. That's wonderful. I am glad humanity has reached such a time.
Oh, you're happy about that? You're happy that we think slavery is evil now? Because a few seconds ago, you were saying it wasn't a big deal. So, which is it? Is slavery not that bad, or did slavery need to be abolished?
But you said you're from 500 years in the future? How can you come here to the 15th century and judge me by your standards from the 21st century? For those in the future to look back and do this is, well, estúpido.
Oh, yeah, stupid question. Asking if slavery was evil in the past. I mean, you can't judge people of the past for the atrocities they might have committed. Who is to say that Mussolini or Hirohito did anything wrong? I mean, you weren't there. You didn't live through that time period. It was a different time. People had different standards, so who are you to judge, stupid children?
Are you calling me dumb?
Certainly not. I can tell you're a very smart young lady. But the idea of throwing away the past because of your present values is...
Nobody is talking about throwing out the past, you conservative clown cartoon. People are talking about being more knowledgeable and critical of history instead of blindly accepting all the good without recognizing any of the bad. This video is literally trying to excuse slavery as no big deal. You could just say, yeah, we had slavery, it sucked, it's dehumanizing, never should have happened, but I also did these cool things. That's taking the good with the bad. This video argues that there is no bad.
So good and bad is based on the time you live in?
That is a great question. I told you I knew you were smart. Some things are clearly bad, no matter when they happen. But for other things, before you judge, you must ask yourself, what did the culture and society of the time treat as no big deal? Not everyone can time travel as you do and see how normal becomes very not normal.
Yes, consider the time period, because back then slavery was normal and no big deal. But you know who didn't think it was normal and no big deal? You know who would disagree with Columbus's points? Slaves. It wouldn't surprise me if in this video a slave pops up on the screen and says, yep, this is normal and cool. I love being a slave. Don't judge my time period. Better a slave than dead.
If people in your time want to celebrate me for being a perfect hero, then they are very mistaken. Only my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ is perfect.
Public schools. PragerU wants your kids to watch this in a public school.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome, kids. Now, let me lock you up and show you to the King and Queen of Spain. Just kidding.
It's funny because Columbus said he was going to enslave the children, but then he didn't. But also, if he did, hey, it's no big deal. Slavery wasn't a big deal. Don't ever question it. The hero worship and apologia for Columbus is embarrassing, and it's been going on for a long time. In terms of depictions in media, no year was more cringe with Columbus than 1992, the 500th year of the United States of America. Numerous Christopher Columbus films were released that year to celebrate this American milestone. There was John Glenn's Christopher Columbus, The Discovery, with a cast that included Marlon Brando and Tom Selleck. And it's a mess. There were huge creative clashes, a budget spiraling out of control, and atrocious performances, even by Brando and Selleck's lowered standards at the time. It's historically inaccurate in many of its depictions, but also, it's just boring. Ridley Scott's 1492 Conquest of Paradise is less terrible, but still pretty bad. It's a better shot film and features stronger performances with Gerard Depardieu and Sigourney Weaver, but it's also still riddled with historical inaccuracies and a very lacking script. Gerald Thomas's Carry On Columbus is a British comedy that tries to find the funny in Columbus, and it's...
Thank you very much.
Carry on, Columbus.
Carry on, Columbus.
Let's put it this way, it's considered to be one of the worst British comedies ever made. Finally, there's The Adventures of Pico and Columbus, a German animated comedy. And most millennials will remember this film better as the English adaptation The Magic Voyage, featuring the voices of Dom DeLuise, Corey Feldman, and Mickey Rooney. And it is just the king of historically inaccurate Christopher Columbus movies from 1992, especially for the intentions of director Michael Schumann, who stated that he wanted to depict Columbus as, quote, a lovable, charming, and befuddled scholar.
Okay, I get to the ball, yes, sir. Wow! Oh, Tati!
The Magic Voyage used to be the worst cartoon depiction of Christopher Columbus, but then PragerU came along and just took that title. Speaking of slavery, let's look at the Leo and Layla video on Frederick Douglass.
That's right, Bob. Despite some violence and destruction by some of our angrier activists, we're seeing mostly peaceful protests.
Protesters are demanding that the police be abolished.
Well, Clint, these local activists want to abolish the police. They're claiming systematic oppression and want the U.S. system torn down.
What is going on? Things are so weird right now.
In the context of this video released in 2021, there were many demonstrations against police brutality in the wake of police officer Derek Chauvin murdering George Floyd. So how are the kids going to learn about this current event? Well, they don't.
Why is everyone so angry? Are they burning a car? What does abolish even mean?
That's enough. Let's get to the bottom of this.
The app?
You got it. Abolitionist? Let's check this out.
PragerU kids, teaching your children how to look up information poorly. So they travel back in time to visit Frederick Douglass and ask him about abolishing slavery.
We're trying to learn about activism and abolishing things. Can you help us?
Well, not to brag, but I'm the perfect guy for you to talk to. I'm the most famous activist in America, and I'm currently working on getting something abolished.
Abolish means to end, right? What are you wanting to get rid of?
I want slavery to end. At this time that you have come to visit, for half of the United States, it is okay for some people to own other people, make them work for many hours for no pay, and force them to do anything, anytime.
That's so unfair and horrible.
You're right.
Yeah, it was unfair and horrible in the 19th century. Unlike the 15th century, however, in which it wasn't that bad and slavery was just a normal part of life. There's a whole lot of apologetics for America being great, saying that slavery is slowly getting abolished under the American government. Douglass also mentions his split with William Lloyd Garrison for being too radical. But eventually, the episode gets to the point they want Douglass to make about our modern politics.
So, Mr. Douglass, do you think we should be activists, just not radical ones?
Layla, your America where people are free and everyone is equal under the law sounds pretty great. But no place is perfect. So it's good to listen to activists who want to improve things. But they have to be willing to work inside our system. And they have to understand that change usually requires patience and compromise. Then you might want to join their cause. But if they are radicals like Garrison, you and your brother will be best served to stay away.
So, like, slavery is bad and we should get rid of it, but also, stop shouting about it so much. You need to work inside the system that thinks slavery is still okay. It is laughable to imagine that Frederick Douglass was a calm and collected activist who worked entirely within the American system to abolish slavery. This is especially ridiculous when considering his famous speech where he said this, quote, "I have no love for America as such. I have no patriotism. I have no country. What country have I? The institutions of this country do not know me, do not recognize me as a man." The cartoon also wants to downplay radicalism, suggesting that Douglass didn't care for that type of activism. Even though Douglass supported radical abolitionist John Brown, the guy responsible for the slave revolt of Harper's Ferry. And while Douglass didn't join Brown in that raid, it wasn't because he thought it was wrong to lead a revolt. Douglass didn't participate in the revolt because he didn't think they would win. This cartoon sucks in its attempt to downplay activism and the hideous atrocities of America's history with slavery. Speaking of discussions on historical atrocities, let's look at another Leo and Layla video called Meet a Holocaust Survivor. Massive tonal shift in this video.
Someone broke into my friend Hannah's locker and drew a swastika. When we found it, she got so upset she almost cried. I've never seen her so shocked and hurt.
A swastika? You mean that evil sign the Nazis wore on their uniforms? That's terrible! But why would a drawing make her cry?
Hannah's Jewish, Leo. Her great-grandparents had to leave Germany when the Nazis came to power. They barely escaped the Holocaust.
Whoa, that makes more sense.
Does it have to make more sense than that? Does someone have to be Jewish to be offended by a swastika? The Nazis didn't just target Jews, but also people of color and queer folk. Not to mention socialists who didn't fit the nationalist version of socialism, and generally everybody who disagreed with them. If somebody receives graffiti of a Nazi swastika, they are likely going to be terrified and disgusted, regardless of whether they are Jewish or had a family that escaped the Holocaust. I think that part should be stressed so that when somebody gets distressed over Nazi graffiti, your kid doesn't respond with something dumb like, What are you getting offended about? Are you Jewish?
But still, it's just a drawing, right?
That's what I thought. When I saw Hannah was upset, I tried to calm her down. I told her whoever drew it was just being dumb and to not worry about it. But then she wouldn't talk to me. She even looked scared.
I know that the whole point of this cartoon is that Layla learns more about how Jews experience anti-Semitism, but also, it's pretty weird that Layla initially states that she's aware of the Nazis and the Holocaust, but is still baffled by why Jews would be offended by the swastika.
I feel like I should have done something different, but I'm not sure what.
You know, this might be a good time for us to learn more about what happened during the Holocaust.
A very normal sentence that children would say.
Good point. Maybe we'll understand more why Hannah got so upset.
Now, for those wondering, no, they don't actually travel back to the Holocaust. They instead visited a Holocaust memorial in Israel in 2004. Like, I get it. They want to talk to a Holocaust survivor, but, like, they're not all dead. This seems like an issue you could talk about in the present.
Maybe you can help us. It sounds like you know all about this place.
I should. My name is Miriam, and I'm a tour guide here at Yad Vashem. If you have any questions, I'll try to answer them.
So, do all of these pictures show somebody who died in the Holocaust?
They do. We've spent years collecting pictures and testimonies from the victims' families. When another story comes in, we record it so it won't be forgotten.
But that's so many people. Did the Nazis really kill all of them?
They did, and many more than what you see here.
That's terrible.
I just want to point out the massive tonal shift in the show. I just went from a colorful and chipper cartoon about Christopher Columbus downplaying slavery, but now I'm on to a cartoon that gets all serious with mournful music about Holocaust survivors in the exact same art style.
How can such an enormous, evil thing like the Holocaust even happen?
Hey, good question. I wonder if fellow PragerU commentator Michelle Malkin has any information on this topic. I mean, she's friends with modern-day Nazis, and I'm sure they have plenty of opinions on the Holocaust.
It started when a terrible, hateful man came to power, Adolf Hitler. After World War I, Germany was in terrible shape. Hitler said that we Jews were the problem, and that we needed to be eliminated. He even wrote a book about it, Mein Kampf.
I understand this is meant for kids, but the reduction for such a serious topic does feel a bit off. Because yes, Hitler thought Jews were the problem in Germany, but also communists, gays, bisexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, the disabled, Polish, Roma, immigrants, Soviet POWs, and pretty much anybody who disagreed with them. I bring this up only because I don't think Jews are the only ones who would be terrified of the Nazis. Everybody should despise the Nazis because they will come after you. The rest of the video is a pretty standard explanation of the Holocaust from a survivor's point of view. It's a pretty sad story, and it does a decent job of conveying the atrocities of the Holocaust and being sent to a concentration camp. The survivor brings up how the Jews were basically enslaved and worked to death through slavery. Not the kind of slavery in the 15th century, because that was normal. 20th century slavery is much different, and that slavery was wrong. But if this video seems too dark, don't worry, parents. PragerU made a gentler Holocaust survivor cartoon aimed at younger kids with Otto's Tales. Let's meet a volunteer, honoring Holocaust survivors. Oh yeah, gender, race, and sexuality were just too much for young kids, but yeah, sure, let's just dump show on their laps. Yep, sure, great call, PragerU kids! So the framing of Otto's Tales is that an adult reads a book starring the dog Otto, the cat Smidge, and Otto's human friend Dennis, and yes, that is supposed to be a young version of Dennis Prager.
Isn't that cute? Not bad.
The premise of the story is that Dennis goes to a retirement home to sing to the elderly. He's going to bring along Otto and Smidge, a choice that warrants these hilarious expressions.
Otto and Smidge were uncertain. Won't it be boring there? Smidge questioned. And what would we talk about with them? Otto blurted. I don't think we'll have anything in common.
Maybe you could talk about the fact that you're a talking dog and cat? Like, I get it. The dog and cat are supposed to represent the kids who are unsure about visiting their elders. But that's a bit of flimsy representation when considering they're being led around by a human child. So anyway, after some truly terrible walking animation, the story shifts to Otto and Smidge meeting an old lady called Sarah. And after some inane banter, we get this exchange.
Are you sad? Otto's tail dropped. Yes, a bit, Sarah admitted. I've been writing down memories from a very difficult time in my life. My family wants to understand what happened, but it's hard to put it into words. She paused and then leaned in. Have you ever heard of the Holocaust?
A very normal question to ask kids and/or talking animals amid an introductory meeting.
The friends became very quiet. I've heard about the Holocaust, Otto replied. I think my friend Dennis studied it in history class. What is it? Smidge was curious to learn. I can take notes.
A very normal thing for a kid and/or cat to say when first hearing about the Holocaust.
Sarah's gentle voice began to speak. When World War II began in the year 1939, I was only about 11 years old. There was a powerful group in charge called the Nazis.
Okay, I'm sorry. This scene should be a serious scene, but Otto's look of horror as the old woman talks about the Holocaust is just... It's so unintentionally hilarious. Like, I shouldn't be laughing at this, but watch as Otto's eyes slowly turn towards the camera with this shocked face. Like, it's like he's silently telling you, are we really doing this? This is the format you're going to use to talk about the Holocaust? So the old lady starts explaining concentration camps to the dog and cat.
They sent us to places called concentration camps, where we were forced to do very hard work against our will. Smidge scribbled on her notepad. What kind of work? Well, Sarah's face wrinkled. We had to move heavy rocks across the camp, and we were only given a small bit of bread to eat one time every day. The kitten stopped writing and gasped. That's it? You must have been so hungry.
Okay, Smidge's reaction isn't as ridiculous as Otto's, but still, look at this. Look at how you're teaching the Holocaust.
I was small, so I was able to hide and stay away from people who wanted to hurt me. I knew that there were good people fighting against the evil that was happening. I remember when American soldiers showed up to free our camp and how happy I was.
This type of production really softened the edges of the story. I mean, I get it. It's meant for, kindergarten to grade 2, and yeah, you have to simplify stuff for younger minds, but this seems like too much of a simplification that borders on inappropriate. Okay, so that's the end of Sarah's Holocaust story, so how do we place a nice bow on this dismal tale of history's greatest atrocity?
What makes you happy now? Otto asked. Oh, everything. Sarah's watery eyes slowly turned to a soft smile. All sorts of simple things make me happy. My own bed to sleep in, a piece of pie. I'm grateful for all the little things in life I get to enjoy. Smidge licked her lips. Pie makes me happy too. Going through hard things can be difficult and scary, Sarah replied. But many times those hard things teach us to be even more grateful for the blessings in our lives.
I think a better lesson from the Holocaust would be not to let fascists rise to power and normalize that type of hatred. But yeah, sure, you survived the Holocaust, so be grateful you have pie.
Sarah's face lit up. Isn't that lovely? It reminds me of when I first came to the United States. One of the first things I saw when I got off the boat in New York was a musician playing and singing on the dock. I'm so grateful to live here in America now, where people can be happy and free.
Say, how are y'all doing out there? Everybody here in America enjoying being happy and free right now?
Sarah reminded us that we share a lot of things as Americans, no matter what our age. We all enjoy freedom and should treat others with kindness and respect.
PragerU, famous for treating others with kindness and respect.
The left has made it impossible to say the N-word any longer. That's disgusting. It's a farce. It's the only word that you can't say in the English language.
The end. You know what part I'm going to remember most? The part when Sarah talked about how happy she was when the American soldiers helped her people.
The part with the soldiers was like 3 seconds? She barely talked about that. She spent more time talking about how cruel it was that the Nazis did bad things to them. She also didn't address the mass killings inside the concentration camp. She only highlighted the hard work and lack of food and clothing, which, yeah, that was bad, that happened, but I'm pretty sure there was way worse that went down in the concentration camps. And again, yes, this is meant for very young children, so you do have to soften it, but do you see the problem here? Do you see how softening the Holocaust so much kind of diminishes its importance? Do you see the problem in having a cartoon dog and cat learn about this crucial piece of history? Do you think maybe you should have put more research into how to properly explain this information to young children? You know, like how Sesame Street does? Anyway, the part I'm going to remember most from this story is Otto's reaction when Sarah starts talking about the Holocaust.
There was a powerful group in charge called the Nazis.
I think it's worth comparing how Sesame Street talks about tragedy as opposed to the methods of PragerU Kids. Sesame Street wanted to tackle the fears that came with 9/11, but do so in a way that wasn't too heavy for kids to process. Instead of directly staging Elmo reacting to the event, the puppet witnesses a fire at Hooper's store. This scenario was additionally used for Arthur, a show aimed at a much older audience. Both shows process the complex feelings and uncertainty of moving forward after a frightening event in which people were hurt. This is a much more genuine way of approaching the anxieties of 9/11. It's far better than just having a scene where Gordon is asking Elmo, "Hey Elmo, are you familiar with the World Trade Center attacks of September 11th, 2001? And then proceed to just soften as much of the event as possible to the point of dangerously miscommunicating the tragedy of the events. Sesame Street took the time and consideration to find better ways to deal with the feelings following 9/11 instead of just dumping the events out as poorly as PragerU Kids. I don't really want to go through more of Otto's tales. The other episodes have more uncomfortable topics like let's visit Arlington National Cemetery with a turtle veteran, which kind of seems inappropriate here. Like, did the turtle go to war? Or the episodes are just literally stories from the Bible, which is why the separate playlist I found for Otto's tales on PragerU Kids' YouTube page was under animated Bible stories for kids, because that's something public school children should be learning about. And finally, for the older kids, there are shows like Cash Course and The Hustle, which are, they're just about money. Cash Course teaches economic basics, and The Hustle is a show all about teenage entrepreneurs. Because if you're a teenager, you should have your own business by now. Are you 17 years old? Why don't you have your own clothing line yet?
What's wrong with you? Why are you so lazy? Don't you know we live in a hustle culture?
Now, in all fairness, Cash Course does at least have some decent information, like explaining how tariffs work in a way that doesn't downplay the hideous trade war that we're currently within. So there are some okay lessons here, but this is for much older kids, and only on one specific topic meant to prop up capitalism rather than to observe it critically. And that's basically PragerU Kids. Cartoonish simplifications of historical figures, Bible stories, clumsy attempts to talk about the Holocaust, and business boners. That's it. None of those soft lessons from PBS shows about sharing and being nice and recognizing patterns, or how to address topics like autism, divorce, and death. No, it's all about loving America unquestioningly, bragging about the Bible, teaching some stuff about the Holocaust, and dollar bill, y'all. The gulf between a show like Sesame Street and the programming on PragerU Kids is so vast. I don't know how much research PragerU placed in their shows aimed at kids, but I think it's safe to say that it was far less than Sesame Street. Now, when I say PragerU Kids will never replace Sesame Street, I don't mean that in a funding or curriculum sense. I mean that in terms of the educational material and entertainment value. When I watched Sesame Street as a kid, I didn't just see it as an educational show. I mean, it was fun. And when I watched Sesame Street as an adult, it's still fun. I mean, I love putting clips on now and then of stuff like Monster Piece Theater or Grover's Many Encounters with the Aggravated Blue Man. Even those classic clips of Elmo getting angry at Zoe and her pet rock are just, They're comedy gold. I still love those clips. I don't have that same affection for something like Leo and Layla or Otto's Tales. I mean, even if I grew up being forced to watch this crap, I would not return to it as an adult. It's dry with its lessons, dull with its characters, and the animation is just visually unappealing. This looks like shit, and I doubt any kid who has to grow up watching trash like this in the classroom is going to return to these cartoons for entertainment. And they especially won't have fond memories of these cartoons when they figure out that they were full of shit. PragerU kids might try to replace Sesame Street as hard as they can, but they'll never match the quality. They don't put anywhere near the same level of thoughtfulness into their educational research. They don't fund visually appealing animation looking like the cheapest flash animation that somebody slapped together. They do not know how to entertain like Sesame Street. One of the most poignant pieces of Sesame Street media is the franchise's first feature film, Follow That Bird. The film centers around Big Bird being plucked from Sesame Street and placed in a foster home with other birds. The social worker, Miss Finch, believes that this will make Big Bird happier, even though he is already happy where he lives and with the family that he has made. Finch also stresses that Big Bird should be with his own kind. The family that Big Bird stays with, a collective of dodos, is also just as bigoted in their beliefs. They think that Big Bird shouldn't associate with anybody who isn't a bird because apparently all non-birds are dumb in their eyes, and they're very, very dumb eyes. The film couldn't be clearer about its message. Forcing people out of families that love them and segregating them is idiotic. The dodos are too dumb to realize how ignorant it is to look down on those different from you. Miss Finch is too strict to find fault in her birds-only segregation of families, though she eventually comes around by the end of the film. And the rest of the movie is a road trip comedy with all the Sesame Street characters, and it's very fun. I grew up watching this film, and it still holds up. And just like how the musical numbers and charming humor have stood the test of time, the messaging has aged gracefully. Think how resonant the story holds up today. Big Bird is forced out of his home by somebody who thinks that he should be with his own kind, tearing him away from his family. He is placed in a family of bigots who do not love him the same way that his family did on Sesame Street. Big Bird's journey back home has him being forced into slavery. He is saved not by the social worker, but by his family. The film is about condemning bigotry and the separation of families in the name of that bigotry. So yet again, Sesame Street went woke. In 1985, another grand example of why conservatives just want Sesame Street to go away. Thankfully, despite the government cutting PBS funding, Sesame Street is not going away. Yet. The show was bought up by Netflix, and it sounds like there will be a better deal to get these new episodes on PBS as well. In the short term, that's good news. Generations of families have grown up with Sesame Street's influence and taken advantage of the resources made available through the brand, and none of this should stop because another batch of pissy Republicans think that the concepts of empathy and sharing are communism via puppetry. In the long term, however, it may only be a matter of time before Netflix abandons Sesame Street. The government used to recognize Sesame Street as an important educational television show worth financing. Netflix recognizes the show as just another TV show with a contract they can renew or discontinue when the time comes. And that honestly makes me fearful for the future of Sesame Street. More good news, however, is that while I was writing this, Sesame Street announced that they'd reached a deal with YouTube as well to host their extensive catalog. And that's great to hear because it means that when conservatives try to force PragerU kids videos on your children, there's a higher chance of them running across Sesame Street in the recommended videos. Sesame Street is more than just Muppets. It's about keeping people educated with invaluable resources for improving lives and creating a better world. As Jon Stewart made the case for PBS in his debate with Bill O'Reilly, he remarked that It is one of the best investments in using television for educational purposes. It's also why conservatives hate the shit out of it, because they hate to live in a world where Elmo and Big Bird make more sense than the bitching and moaning of Republican stooges like Ted Cruz and Marjorie Taylor Greene. Elmo and Big Bird will continue to live on as arbiters of early education, while Cruz and Greene will inevitably fade into the pit of other disgusting Republicans who tried to silence Sesame Street. If you're against Sesame Street and PBS and think their funding should be pulled and the programs yanked off the air and replaced by PragerU Kids, history will not remember you fondly. To quote a meme I've seen circulating online, PBS didn't suddenly become woke. You just grew up to become a bad person.
The left has made it impossible to say the N-word any longer. That's disgusting. It's a farce. It's the only word that you can't say in the English language.
Hey there, folks. Thanks for watching my video on PragerU Kids and Sesame Street. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date on more of my video essays as well as reviews of the latest movies. If you'd like to support me, I have a Patreon below, which will give you access to some of my movie history books that I've been working on. Thanks for watching. Go watch Follow That Bird. I rewatched it before making this video, and it's still such a fun, wholesome film.